Hello again, everyone in Psych 267. We're getting close to the end of the semester, so let's get started for this week's reading packet material for forensic psychology. This week, sections 11 and 12. Now, I don't mean to brag on myself too much. If I do, you can just let me know. But I think I might know more about the study of juvenile delinquency than maybe anybody that you know, unless, of course, you are like related to a judge or a defense attorney, or maybe you yourself were in the system for a while. Maybe. But I've been doing this juvenile delinquency stuff for a very long time, almost 25 years. I've done thousands, and I mean thousands of evaluations on kids who have been arrested for various things. So let's get started. I'm going to tell you just what I need you to know, because of course these videos can't go on forever and you need to read the material on your own as well. In Arizona, being a juvenile means that you are at least 8 years old, but not 18 years old, somewhere in between. So if you commit a crime and you're 6 or 7, you cannot get arrested. Did you know that? Well, now you do, huh? And if you're 18, obviously you're an adult. So moving right along, about 3% of kids that are juveniles get arrested. The other 97% don't. And I've got news for you. I think they all know each other, the ones who do, because when I see one kid, they usually know the other ones that I've seen who've been arrested. In Arizona, that number is slightly higher, more like 4% of all of our juveniles. And I think one big reason for that is people moving in and out of Arizona, especially moving here. When we get a new group of people, they don't know each other. Sometimes their kids go out exploring and they find trouble. So when you're not situated in your community, that is one reason. Now, sorry, lost my place for a second. Right here, 20% of offenders are female, 4 out of 5 boys, and only 1 out of 5 females. I lost my place for a second. Sorry about that. What's the difference between juvenile court and adult court? Well, a bunch of things, but here's some that I want you to know. 1, it's less common to be locked up as a juvenile. The things you'll spend jail time for as an adult, shoplifting or assault or drug possession, as a juvenile, they tend not to lock you up. They don't want to traumatize you, but maybe that's what you need if you ask me. Anyway, what else? Juveniles are given far more chances, where adults, the consequences are usually much more swift and severe. Also, moving right along, in Arizona, we don't use juries for juvenile cases. You've heard of being judged by a jury of your peers. That would be kind of funny, having a bunch of 10-year-olds judge you. We don't do that in Arizona. It's a judge only. It's called a bench trial. And the last thing here, the plea bargain, letting you negotiate, get part of your charges dropped, compromise, that's done way more in the juvenile system than the adult system. Now we're going to talk about some theories. Pretty much every class you take in social sciences, you have to talk about theories of why people are the way they are. Well, let's go over some of them. First one, psychological disorders. You committed that crime, you are a juvenile delinquent because, well, you have ADHD, you have oppositional defiant disorder, you have conduct disorder, you have autism, whatever. So the psychological disorder in this theory would tell us a lot about the kid's propensity for committing crimes. Next theory, rational choice. We can't blame it on your diagnosis. You made a choice. You made a decision. That is why you are the way you are. We're not going to take any excuses. You made bad choices. Next thing, social disorganization. You'll see some of these overlap. They're different but similar. The next two are sociology kind of theories. Social disorganization. Show me the neighborhood you come from, and I will show you how likely it is you're going to get involved in crime. And I can tell you in the Phoenix area, other places I work, like Pinal County, that is largely true. Can kids from a nice middle class neighborhood get arrested? Of course they can. But when there's, no parental supervision or parents are working all the time and it's a more working class or lower class neighborhood, you do see that more. Now, that might sound like it gets into racism, and I can understand that because you might say, oh, well, those are Black or Latino neighborhoods or Native American neighborhoods. There might be some truth to that, but it's a lot more than skin color. It has more to do with the company that you keep and the neighborhood you belong to and the type of people that live there, that a lot of times they're up to no good. Strain. Next theory. This has to do more with being poor. And this has more to do with theft than violent crimes because you don't get what you need or what you want, well, you're just going to take it. A lot more theft and robberies and burglaries and things like that. And yes, there's more violent crimes in those areas and among those people who are poor, but it does have to do with a lack of education, a lack of hope, a lack of resources. So it has more to do with theft than other kinds of crimes, but it does have to do with violence as well, just to a lesser extent. Labeling. This theory is interesting. If you tell a kid early on, you're a juvenile delinquent, you're no good, you're a troublemaker, guess what? That kid is going to act like it. Labeling. And family environment. This is kind of repetitive in these two paragraphs. It says kind of the same things, but that's okay. So, poor attachment to parents and parents not being supportive of kids, they are more likely to have juvenile delinquent kids. Next paragraph, parental conflict and not supervising your children well. See what I mean? Similar concepts, but different. Basically, what we're saying here is family problems. Whether it's a single parent household, that's not necessarily indicative of juvenile delinquency, but it can be, especially if that parent isn't able to bond with the child and have time for the child. But parental conflict and lack of supervision and lack of bonding between parents and children, yeah, those are all factors. Prevention. What can we do to not have you be a juvenile delinquent? You know what? If I knew the answer to that, I would be rich and famous. It's not that easy. I minimized it so you can see all the paragraphs together here. First of all, primary, secondary, and tertiary, also known as after-the-fact prevention. So let's go over those. Primary prevention, before you ever even have a chance to start in a life of crime, we're going to educate you about it. DARE programs in school are a perfect example of this. Do they work? Answer, not really. A lot of times it makes kids more interested in drugs and crime. So it's unfortunate. You think you educate them early, it'll solve it. Doesn't seem to help all that much. Secondary prevention. You already have risk factors. You know what? You got caught shoplifting. We're going to make you sit in a jail cell for 4 hours so you can see what it looks like. We are going to try to intervene before it gets too bad. And tertiary is known as after the fact, locking you up, ankle monitor, fining you money financially after the fact. And that is considered the most intensive, but you know what? Are you going to learn and say, I want to change now? Or are you just going to say, you know what? I'm just going to keep acting the way I am. So tertiary is after the fact. Primary, secondary, and tertiary. So we end this section of the reading packet with a cute little Google image that I found. Look at that baby in jail in his pinstripes. In Arizona, that wouldn't happen, huh? You have to be 8 years old. That kid can't be more than 2, if you ask me. Well, it's meant to be a joke. Not for him, though, huh? Victimology, the next section, doesn't necessarily follow along with juvenile delinquency. I guess it's related, but not really the same thing. It's very different. So what we want to know here is, Who ends up being the victim of crimes? That has a lot to do with forensic psychology, not just knowing who the perpetrators are, who the criminals are, but who ends up being a victim. So, two reasons why we do this: to understand crimes and the types of crimes, but also how it impacts people and how you can reduce your chance of becoming a victim. Now, if you don't like numbers and statistics, my apologies, because there are a bunch of them in this chapter to know. So, let's start. I don't know why this isn't on the next page here. It should be where it says by the numbers. It should start the next page. Anyway, 21 million crimes in 2010. I should probably update my statistics here to make it more modern, but that was a last of the big census numbers, 2010. 16 million had to do with property, whereas the other 5 million were against people, like violence. So, what is that? About 3/4 of them, a little bit more, are property crimes. Things get stolen or broken compared to people getting hurt. So let's look at those numbers a little more closely. You can see where these numbers fall. Simple assault, somebody getting pushed or had their hair pulled or slapped or cut. Well, that's a little different than aggravated, where a person is really injured. That doesn't happen as often. You don't have to memorize all of these numbers, by the way. Just know that there's a lot more against things than people. Theft, out of all of them, is the most common. More than half of all crimes are theft. Now, next thing to know. This is interesting. People who are 12 to 15 years old are the most likely to be victims of crimes. Remember, this is victimology. But those who are 65 and older, they are the least likely. Wait a minute. Shouldn't old people be the easiest targets to steal from or hurt? Well, guess what? They just don't take many chances. If you've ever been around someone that age and they tell you, oh, you know what? Yesterday I went to Target and Trader Joe's. Well, that might be a lot for an elderly person. Whereas young people tend to hang out at parties and on the streets and stuff like that. So it is not surprising. Male victims are far more common than female victims. Certainly for sexual assault, that's not true. But as far as just being the victims of theft and violent crimes that are other than sexual assaults, because, well, more risk-taking and getting into fights and things like that. Unfortunately, Black people are the more likely race of any to be victims of crimes than whites, Hispanics, or any other race. It might have to do with often living in more economically challenged neighborhoods or other factors, but in the United States, there is some truth to that. Being a victim, it's more likely to be true when you are young, Black, and male, and lower income. That's the last thing that's on this list. So the next paragraph speaks to that more specifically. Now, last thing, we're almost done with this chapter. Sexual assault and rape. I will tell you what I want you to know. First of all, we don't know statistics for certain because a lot of people don't report it. They're embarrassed, they're humiliated, they feel like nobody's going to believe them anyway. It's certainly understandable that not all sexual crimes get reported. So, we do have U.S. Bureau of Statistics and crime victimization in the United States, a report that came out, but still, we don't know how accurate these things are. So, 91% of rape victims are female, 9% are male. 99% of the offenders are male. It's pretty rare for a female to have that kind of behavior, sexually assaulting or raping somebody. It can happen, it's just not common. So, what else do you want to know? 24% were committed by a stranger. The other 3/4 or more, somebody that the person knows. That's what makes it even worse to report if it's a relative or a friend or someone that you're going to have to see. This can create a lot of hardships and a lot of difficulties. 47% of the time in rapes, the victim and the perpetrator have been drinking or using drugs. It certainly doesn't make it okay or defensible, but it's just something to know that it's easier to be taken advantage of when you're under the influence. 7% of the time, the victim had been drinking or using drugs. So it's more common that it was both people together, the victim and the perpetrator, been drinking or using drugs. 75% of the substance abuse is voluntary, not necessarily somebody slipping something into your drink. So it would be ridiculous to say, oh, well, don't drink or never do any drugs. People are going to do those things, but you just have to be careful of your surroundings and who you're with and minimize risk. That's what we tell people, especially young women. So, rape outdoors is quite rare. In fact, 68% occur in someone's home, not just any kind of building. Almost 31% in the perpetrator's home, almost 29% in the victim's home, 10% somebody that you live with, another 7% at someone's party. So you can see the surroundings have a lot to do with how these things happen, when they happen, and where they happen. Only 3.6% are outdoor locations. So this is all frightening stuff to take in. And again, you don't need to memorize all the statistics, just try to understand the basics. Next time we're going to talk about nonviolent crimes. We're almost at the end, by the way. But that's it. We have 2 chapters this week that are largely about statistics. Juvenile delinquency first, and now this victimology. That's it for now. Take care.